Hello, my name's Andy Schmuckler. Uh, I have been feeling ever since the election that the world is a whole lot pleasant place to look at than it was in the lead up to the election, which I really did think that was going to go the other way, and it is super upsetting that the American people made the choice they did, and it's super upsetting that the power of government is pretty thoroughly in the hands of this one guy who has shown us that he represents just about every character defect and will abuse power in all kinds of ways and is perhaps taking this country over the edge of a tipping point toward a very different future, to be a very different kind of society. I find it just painful to behold a guy who would, I mean, I won't go into it. I'm assuming that whoever is listening to this is likely to share that same thing. If you follow the news closely, it's just really painful to behold what's happening. What with Attorney General is going to at the best, after getting rid of Matt Gaetz, we're going to have an Attorney General who won't admit what the result was of the 2020 presidential election. She is willing to bolster Trump's lie to become Attorney General, which means that she will do whatever this particular guy wants to do. I mean, that's the Department of Justice. And, I believe in justice, and we're not going to see justice coming out of the Department of Justice. There's a whole panoply of things that we see threatening an American ally, Denmark, a NATO ally, and sort of pissing into the soup of a whole fairly coherent organization of nations that's based on mutual values, shared values, and mutual security, a good thing that's been in the world, mostly a good thing since World War II. And he's making threats against about Greenland that belongs to a NATO ally. What kind of guy is this? And he's the president, and he's got the whole Republicans in the Congress intimidated. All right, I said I wasn't going to go into it. I do write about this stuff, but I really don't like to pay this same kind of attention that I used to get pleasure tuning in to, say, Lawrence O'Donnell to discuss with Andrew Weissman the way the noose is tightening around Donald Trump and how he's going to be held, responsible, accountable for his crimes, which was something that we in America really needed to see. I mean, it was very challenging that he was able to do what he did and get away with so much. It really looked like maybe it was going to finally happen, and it didn't. And I can barely stand to see it. In the great history of things, this election looks like it could well prove to have been a real divergence in the path, that we could go this way or we could go that way. And the difference between Kamala Harris being elected and the difference between Donald Trump being elected could be a difference between what are being very different things 20 years from now, or 10 years from now. So it was huge. It turned out badly, and I can barely stand to look. So, I also hear from a lot of other people who can barely stand to look. People who say, I have a friend and a neighbor who has said several times that ever since the election, he's just avoiding the news. I mean, he seems to know some of the big things that are going down because I mentioned them to him, and he seems to know stuff, but he's really trying to avoid it. And I hear that from a lot of people. So I want to talk to people like me and like my neighbor who don't want to look at this terribly ugly picture we see unfolding right now. Who knows what exactly is all going to lead to. I don't pretend to. I can see a real divergence of possibilities. But we lost a big one, and it's heading in bad directions. We can see that with just about every headline, not least this guy freeing the people who committed crimes on his behalf on January 6th. The message being, if you're on my side, everything's okay. I'll even free you for committing crimes like beating up cops. But if you're against me, that's not okay. And then the disturbing thing that I often find myself thinking about, what about these people I live among? These people who vote for Trump. People I would have regarded a generation ago as basically good Americans. What the hell are they doing voting for this thing? So, but I don't want to give up. I mean, it's really not in me to give up. There are such important things at stake that, the whole future of almost everything, every domain of value, from climate change to race relations to the rule of law versus fascistic dictatorship, all these things are just, all the stuff I care about. Truthfulness. We're in that battle that turned out so badly, but history is going to go on. And so I am finding that there's a way of continuing the fight that's less painful. And that is to go into the larger picture, of which this victory of fascism over democracy is one part, an important part, an urgent part for us Americans in the third decade of the third millennium. It's really important what's happening. And I'm not saying not to deal with those, but if you don't have the stomach for it all the time, but you still want to be in there pitching, I suggest that we look at the big picture together, because that's what's been my life's work. And I'm here to share an integrated picture of what are the forces at work, what is the nature of the battle, what exactly are at stake, and what kinds of ways of fighting might be more effective. I don't know that I can prove that part. So that, in a sense, what I'm offering is a kind of a war college for people who've got a little bit of PTSD from the battlefield, like I do, but who want to stay in there pitching to look at what is this battle that just took place in America between, and how does it relate to, and then you can build from there, which is what I've done in my what I call a better human story. And I show some things that have rather major repercussions. Is that what I want to say? Ramifications. If the things I assert are true, which I claim to be able to prove, but that's what I'm going to be doing, is showing that there are certain forces at work in the human world that inevitably emerge if a creature steps out of the natural order by inventing its own way of life, which I call steps onto the path of civilization, extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically. That's the idea that it begins with, and it builds from there. And if I think that it actually would have helped if we could go back 30 years and that way of understanding the forces at work have been conveyed into the world of the pro-democracy side, let's just say. It would have helped to have been able to defeat this thing in the cradle. Because I saw it rising, and I've spent the 90s trying to deal with the one little aspect that I saw then. And then for the last more than 20 years, I spent raising the alarm and saying, this is what's coming. This is what's taking over the political right. This is what needs to be fought. This is the nature of the thing. This is how it arose. All of these things need to be dealt with in a coherent strategy, and it can be defeated. But only if you recognize that something has taken over the Republican Party that the secular worldview doesn't have a way of conceptualizing. So that's a part of what gets built out from what it is that I'm going to say is the foundational idea, which is looking at the point at which we, as a species, stepped onto the path of civilization. And we unleashed a destructive force, inevitably. And if you watch how that force works through the generations, through the centuries, even through the millennia, you can see how things coalesce into very dangerous forces like that which has taken over today's Republican Party, and that which could have been defeated if one saw what was going on more clearly. So I don't know, exactly what would happen if I succeeded in conveying this thing more fully than I have. But I can say, as evidence that it is helpful, that I saw it coming. I got a long paper trail of things from the 90s and especially from the aughts and the teens, which is a pretty good track record for perceiving what was rising and perceiving the failure of the other side from the fascist side to rise to the occasion appropriately. That seeing what the nature of the battle was, seeing the shape of the battlefield, seeing what the nature of the forces were and how they worked in the human world, and seeing how that fit in actually with the whole challenge that we've faced as a species ever since the rise of civilization. So let me just say, I will call your attention to that book, The Parable of the Tribes, The Problem of Power in Social Evolution. And I'll call your attention to my last name and an article titled, The Ugliness We See in Human History is Not Human Nature Writ Large. And it's an idea from which it necessarily follows that step onto the path of civilization. In other words, when we started creating a different kind of life than our primate ancestors and then our hunting-gathering ancestors had lived, basically continuous throughout that. We make it the point of departure, and that represents a really crucial moment in evolutionary history. And if it's taken place on other planets elsewhere in the cosmos, and it almost certainly has, and that's something that'll be part of what I show, is how much of this has been inevitable. We can say with, I think, a fair amount of, if not certainty, at least high confidence, that wherever any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own way of life, it will inevitably unleash a social evolutionary force, a systemic force. It's not a function of the nature of the creature, but a function of the structure or lack of order in the system. That any creature that steps across onto that threshold will be condemned to unfold in whatever the length of time of the early unfoldings of a civilization on that planet in as destructive and tormented a way as we have. So it also therefore follows from what I'm going to be presenting shortly as the foundational idea. It therefore follows that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. And even if there were no additional benefits from seeing the battle clearly, just the fact that it can be seen, pretty well demonstrated, that whatever our nature is, it's better than it has looked. Feeling better about ourselves, I think, is already a step in the right direction. So when we look out at this Trumpian America, we should see that battle that we've lost and the battles that lay ahead in this larger picture of how humankind, because of its breakout into civilization, has been condemned to have a really difficult struggle. And a lot of things have been broken. It was inevitably going to be a force of brokenness that needed to be brought under control. And that book and that essay and the forthcoming video, which I'll be posting on Daily Kos, that will show that we as a species are enacting some inevitable processes that we need to see more clearly in order to be able to get a better handle on it. And that includes probably being able to do battle with this fascist force that's taking over in a much more effective way, because we understand just what it is we're up against. And that book is called What We're Up Against, the destructive force at work in our world and how we can defeat it. That came out in 2015. It was written before Trump even announced for the presidency. I saw this thing coming, and even though it may be a unrealistic fantasy to think that it would help as much as I think it would help if people were to look through this lens to see it, I at least have the evidence that if you look through my writings over the last, well, especially 20 couple years, but maybe even 30, you can see that the battle was clearer. How to fight it was not the way the pro-democracy forces have looked. There's a line that I have used many times. It's from William Butler Yeats. It says, the good lack all conviction, while the evil, no, while the broken are filled with a passionate intensity. And that describes what the case has been in the battle from the early 90s till now, when fascism has been gaining in force repeatedly. Until it now has a takeover that I foresaw that this was the battle, but I did not foresee that you could get most half of America to vote for somebody who had already exposed that he was really aligned with a force of brokenness that consistently makes things worse. I was surprised by how dark things had become already. And I think that we need that passionate intensity on the pro-democracy side. It will look like a very different battle once the pro-democracy side has the passionate intensity of being in touch with their moral and spiritual passions, which, by the way, is one of the things that an objective social, scientific, biological analysis entitles us to say we have within us. Moral and spiritual passions that are inherent to our nature, and to some vague degree, but a meaningful degree, and that are there because they were selected for in the evolutionary process. And they were selected for because it helped those who had those tendencies, those passions, to get their DNA into the future. So we know that it's life-serving. And so weak as we may feel in the face of this defeat, there are sources of strength that were built into us by the process of biological evolution that move us, that empower us, and that my Better Human story integrates into a picture of what has happened to the human species, the challenges that we face as a species on this planet that broke through to civilization, and as Americans in a polity that has deteriorated, devolved, degenerated into a place where something like Donald Trump and the Trump party can be elected by the American people, even after so much of its brokenness has been exposed. So let's not just look at the ugliness that's around us now. Let's look at this larger battle and see where we can get our consciousness for the long-term battle that lies ahead. Dealing with this fascism, I don't know how fast we're going to get out from under it. I have no idea. It might be like the Russian Revolution, 1917 to 1990 or 91. That's a long time. I don't know if it's going to be like that. Or are we going to be able to conquer it in one or two election cycles? I don't know. But we're engaged in a long-term battle because there is something very broken that's gotten loose in the world. And it's going to take a while to defeat it. And we better understand what the nature of this whole battle is. So thank you for listening. Please tune in to various videos and writings on my website, which is abetterhumanstory.org, where I lay things out as systematically and as clearly and in some cases concisely as I can, trying to build this integrated picture that I think could be of help. Thank you.